So today we're here with John Allspaw, Senior Vice President of Operations at Etsy, who's also an advisor for our company, Metafor Software. So welcome, John.
Thank you.
I'm really glad to be able to chat with you today. So the whole impetus for this little talk actually sparked an idea when we had dinner at the last Velocity in June, or a few months ago. And you had talked a lot about some of the things that Etsy was doing that enabled you to, push so many releases out. And what was really interesting was you really didn't talk a lot about the tools and the different technology you guys had. You talked a lot about the people and the culture, and it really resonated and finally clicked for me, sort of this whole idea of DevOps and what it's all about. So I just thought it was really interesting, and I thought, you know what, the next time I see John, I want to do an interview with him and ask him to share this kind of experience and knowledge. And so that's how this whole thing came about. But let me just start by asking, the first question that popped into my head. When I first learned about you was at a Velocity U talk 4 years ago, in I think 2009, and I saw an online video of you giving this talk about how you were able to do these huge number of deploys a day. I think at the time you were still at Flickr.
Yeah, yep.
And I think when that came out, I know a lot of people were like, wow, how is that possible? Disbelief, shock, and really sparked a whole sort of subculture of movement called DevOps. I don't think there was even a term for this, what people were doing, until sort of that time. And a lot of things sort of gelled around those concepts and sort of rolled out into this sort of DevOps movement nowadays. Looking back, from the last 4 years, has the industry moved in the direction, in the way that you thought it would or had expected?
Well, that's a hard question to answer. I mean, I would say, did I expect it? No. Okay. I would say that when Paul Hammond and I gave that talk, we just, we were out to explain, or at least attempt to explain, all of the things that made sense to us at the time. I don't think that we were in any way, shape, or form, harbingers of the future. We certainly weren't revolutionaries.
We're trying to start a fire.
Yeah, no, we wanted to get work done.
Yeah.
And I would say that, the notion of continuous deployment, or the notion of operations and development getting along, was just the result of us. I had a good relationship with Paul, and development had a great relationship with operations, and vice versa at Flickr. So it was, that sort of, we just got along, and we had all of those sorts of shared goals, and we just navigated the complexity of building software as best we could, and that's what we ended up with. Now, I don't think that when I moved from Flickr to Etsy, I don't think that we had any idea whether or not that, at some point we'd figured, that wouldn't, the way that we approached things wasn't going to scale.
Okay.
That's not the case at all. In fact, if anything, I'd say we've gotten a lot better. And looking back at that 2009, it feels so, in a lot of ways, incredibly primitive. I'm happy with the direction that this domain we have here is moving.
Anything you think that the industry could have done better in the direction that it's moved?
Well, I would say, that no, I would say that the industry did what made sense to it at the time. We're still, I guess, to some extent, to a great extent, continuous deployment and the cultural ramifications and sort of challenges of groups with differing domain expertise getting together and augmenting each other's work is still something that we're going to continue.
We're still working on it.
Yeah, we're still working on it,
yeah.
and I can't say that we're at all, not even close to being, at the end.
Okay. Now, you mentioned sort of you moved on to Etsy from Flickr. Did you consciously bring in sort of the Flickr methodology to Etsy, or when you joined, was it already there, or how did you shape it? What are some of the things that you think you did really well at Etsy that helped to make it what it is?
Right. Well, so here's the story. At Flickr we got to build it. I think I was the first operations person at Flickr. Cal Henderson had already thought very much operationally as a developer at Flickr. And so as we built the organization, both engineering
at Etsy.
and at Flickr.
Oh, Flickr, okay.
And operations, these things sort of evolved in parallel.
Okay.
Now, when I went to work at Etsy, Etsy had already been around for some period of time, and they already had their own culture, which was largely different than the way that we had things at Flickr. At Flickr, I had Paul Hammond as my partner in crime, and also at Flickr at the time was Kellen Elliott McRae. And when I came to Etsy, not shortly after, Kellen also came over as VP of Engineering. So there certainly isn't anything special about. I singularly didn't contribute. I mean, to be fair, Kellen and I both absolutely did bring things that worked for us at Flickr. We also bailed on a number of things that weren't going to work at Etsy, or we felt as though we could have done better at Flickr. So yeah, I mean, we certainly didn't we didn't take everything that we had built off the shelf at Flickr and then just expected to plug it in. Organizationally, there was, Kellen and myself, outside of anecdotal stuff, if I worked at Etsy and I was working for myself or Kellen at the time, I certainly wouldn't have believed us. They had to, the engineering organization there needed to take on faith that what we were saying, which was
you're proposing to do,
large, small but frequent changes, and paying very, a huge amount of attention to how we treat each other culturally and socially. That was going to be new, and they decided to go along for the ride.
So we tweeted out, and I'd mentioned to people that I'm going to be interviewing you, and I had asked questions from people to throw me some questions that they wanted to ask you, and one of the ones, very relevant to what you're saying about bringing new culture to Etsy, is what would you recommend a traditional enterprise do if they were trying to get onto this DevOps path? Just like you were new into Etsy, if you were to go into a new organization today, what is maybe the first thing you would do, or the one thing that you think really to get started on?
Well, there is only one thing that I would say, and that is to never insist that there is ever one thing.
Trying to get out of this question.
Yeah, and I don't know. I am at a disadvantage at Etsy because I'm in charge.
Yeah.
So is Kellen. I'd love to be able to inform wholeheartedly somebody who's working in a 5,000-10,000 person organization, and they're part of a smaller group within larger groups within larger groups within larger groups. So I don't know. I would say that some of the work that John Willis had done, and Damon Edwards, and of course Gene Kim, to sort of really peel apart what's in place in successful organizations, culture, automation, measurement, sharing. These are all reasonably, I think, good
elements
things to do.
go after.
It is difficult to be prescriptive.
And that's certainly something I think we're hearing from large enterprises that are trying to get there, is not even knowing where the first step is because there's so much momentum against them.
Yeah, I would also ask, there's a premise in the question is, I would almost say, do they know where is?
Right.
Do they know where they expect to be?
And that may be the very good first step.
If you squint, really what it ends up looking like is a successful business. There is no DevOps nirvana. There is no place where you say, oh, we're here.
Yeah.
And so I am at a loss for advice that doesn't end up looking a lot like, well, Gene Kim's book.
It's certainly a good start.
The Phoenix project is probably about as close to a not very sound-biteable explanation.
But lots of good stories and lots of good, very relevant to the large traditional enterprise as well. That's good. Yeah. Okay, I'm going to change tact a little bit. There were, people did throw us some tool questions and things, and one of them was, I think a lot of people know that you use Chef, and how do you guys fit Chef into the continuous deployment pipeline?
Good question. Good question. Well, so like all conversations that involve continuous deployment, I think that the concept should be used as a starting point, not an ending point. As a starting point to ask more questions, and one of the questions is, are all changes considered equal? And the answer is no. Etsy may deploy I think anywhere between 40 some, I think John Cowie was saying about as upwards of 60 times a day, but we don't make database schema changes 60 times a day. We don't make core routing networking infrastructure 60 times a day. And so I think the content of each change, at which layer, at which part of the infrastructure is hugely important. Now, Chef has a very large role. It's something that sort of maintains the substrate of the infrastructure. How does it fit within our application deployment?
It's continuous.
It doesn't.
Okay.
And to whatever it very much functions as much as, say, schema changes are, right? In order to use a new database table, you write your code so that it can either wait for it for the table to be there, or our columns or indexes to be there. Or you make it backwards compatible. So if there's code that needs to interact with, say, Apache rewrite rules or something along those lines, then we'll make sure that those are in place before the code is rolled out. Now, we don't like to couple any of things sort of like that, so we decouple them as
some of the
possible.
Larger changes that affects a broader number of...
Not larger.
Okay,
affects
different, okay.
I would say different. Rolling out new code, rolling out new PHP in a web document root is very different than turning system kernel parameters, right? It's very different than changing disk I/O schedulers. It's very different than stopping and restarting services, and so we ought to treat them differently. And so the answer is that. Each type of change has a different surface area, a different characteristic.
So different tools and different processes, depending on what kind of changes.
And that is the way it works for Etsy. I certainly know people who deploy both configuration and database changes and code all at once with Chef.
Right, and I've heard that as well.
And we in our environment, we choose to decouple those sorts of things, and that needs to be okay. And I think there's a diversity of ways.
Yeah, there's definitely a spectrum of what we've seen talking to customers. Oh, this is how we do it, all the way to this is how we do it over there, and anything in between as well.
Exactly.
We've seen that as well.
Exactly.
Now, just in talking to you personally, I know that sort of this whole alert overload and it's been an issue for Etsy and many other companies that we've talked to as well. In your mind, how can that be solved? I mean, this is a big question. Maybe it can't be solved in one answer, but just what should people be thinking of when they're thinking, God, I got too many alerts, too many false positives. How do I deal with that?
Right.
What should be their thinking behind
that? I think.
Or what is your thinking behind it? I don't want you to be prescriptive.
Yes,
right?
Thank you. I would say that. So no, I mean, there's a reason why it will never be solved, and that is that with each incrementing improvement, with each success and each failure, we're going to find new things to pay attention to, which means that we will never say everything is instrumented fully
fair enough.
or complete. The second we do, we'll add new functionality or new characteristics to measure. So having said that, the things that are going to affect some amount of signal to noise when it comes to alerting will always be changing.
Okay, so you're always tuning that.
Well, so we're always tuning signal to noise, but you're always building new
Adding
and
new.
modifying the stuff that it's actually instrumenting.
Okay.
Right? So the code doesn't stand still.
Right.
We almost certainly push more code to the web application code
Yeah.
than we do to any of the other parts.
Yeah.
And so and we're going to have new usage characteristics and all of those sorts of things.
Yeah.
Thresholds will change time to time. When we make something faster, a threshold
threshold.
or how we view thresholds
Yeah.
will be different. So no, I don't believe it'll ever be solved. However, I do think that there's a huge amount of insight to be gained by paying attention to what the costs of too many alerts are, and asking very deliberate questions about the alerts that we put together. I mean, making alerting a design exercise.
Sort of
because
making that a priority and a design.
It is a design exercise, and it's incredibly easy to want to be blunt or naive in the hopes that you'll catch it. You know, erring on the side of too many alerts is a mistake I think that many people do.
I certainly have heard that. I mean, I've heard of people having a couple of people 24 hours a day monitoring just because they want to err on the side of too many alerts, but how sustainable is that?
It's not sustainable at all, and some of the folks, Ryan Franz and Laurie Dines, John Cowie at Etsy they've been through no prompting of mine, they've been doing what a lot of people have been doing in quantifying the amount of sleep that they get through I think they use a Jawbone and some of them use a Fitbit, and they're now documenting the amount of sleep loss that they have as a result of alerts, and this has a very real and material effect on decision making when they're
awake.
Their abilities to make sense of disorienting scenarios, and I think that's more of that, please.
Yeah, and I think one of the problems is alerting and even monitoring as an afterthought. After you push out something, then we'll just monitor some stuff, and so they use very blunt instruments because they just haven't put a lot of thought into it.
Exactly.
Maybe raising that in level of priority becomes more important.
Yeah, and I mean, again, like and by priority, I mean once we view it as something, it's not a bolt-on. It is a thing that you think of while you're building it. I mean, and I will say that there's some cases. And I think that we will always get better at this. But there are some cases where having the alerts is done before the code that it is instrumenting is even finished.
Right.
And that way it is not an afterthought.
You know exactly what you're trying to alert on. Yeah. I'm just going to change tactic one more time, bringing back to something recent. I know recently you wrote a blog post about the Night Capitol incident. Huge loss. The SE wrote a release not long ago about it. Many people see it as a postmortem. You did not, and pointed out some counterfactual thinking that was going on here. Maybe just, very quickly give us some of your thoughts behind this and what prompted you to write such a long blog post about this.
Well, I think that the core of the inside of what motivated me to write a little bit about it, well, it ended up being a lot more writing than I expected once I set out to do it. But the notion that any story is the story, and when you have a story and it's written on letterhead and it has Securities Exchange Commission. It has a 3-letter acronym. It has it is written by someone who's entrusted and responsible for putting together authority, but also they are arguably they are responsible for putting in place rules, and those rules and procedures and those sorts of things have a very real place. But the difficulty is that in absence of any other report, right, we didn't hear from Night Capitol. We didn't hear from the engineer. We didn't hear from the operations engineer who deployed this new stuff. We didn't hear about any other details. Even if I think in the blog post that I put together, Richard Cook pointed out that even if we did, it still is mistaken to believe that we would have a complete picture of what happened. And he's absolutely right. The SEC release states what Knight Capital in the SEC's determination violated in way of rules. Okay. There is a modicum, a small amount of technical detail in the release, but it serves the purpose of outlining where and how they
broke the rules.
how they violated rules.
Right.
It gives us no explanation about why the events unfolded. Right? You can't say, well, why did we have this surprising event? Well, it's because you didn't follow the rules. Okay, well, why didn't you follow the rules? Well, because you didn't follow the rules.
Right.
And that is a tautology.
Yeah.
So we get no explanation. The compelling thing is that we have this really, it's dramatic. Look, there's lots of blood and like
big
there's
dollars,
a story
yeah.
plot. There's a 440 or 60 or 20 over 20 or 40 minutes. Oh, then that must have been really bad. This is outcome bias,
yes,
right?
Yes.
If anybody wants to know, if anybody is under the idea that a single character, a well-placed single character or syntax error can't take down a very large, complex system, they probably have never operated one.
Right. Yeah.
And so my motivations for writing it is less that the SEC did something wrong. They did exactly what they are expected to do, but there is no difference,
don't know,
right?
yeah.
Now, and I am not an expert in electronic trading systems.
Yeah.
However, the SEC is a rule-making and enforcement body. There is, if there is such a thing in aviation, this is the FAA. But the FAA, which has similar responsibilities to the SEC, there is no NTSB equivalent, right? The SEC gets to play that role,
right. So
whether they want to or not.
Yeah.
So explanation cannot be found in that document.
Right.
Just a very simple judgment,
Yeah.
which is here are the rules, and we believe with our own judgment that you broke them.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was really interesting for a lot of people. It's just the amount of money, right? That the big outcome, and as you say, a small script error could easily cause those kind of outcome, or it could cause a very small negative outcome. And because this was big, everybody said, "Oh my gosh, look at it," right? And I think that's a big part of it.
And I suspect that if you were to ask people who are in high frequency trading, I think the thing that's shocking is not that they lost that much money. It's that they lost that such small amounts of money.
It could have been worse.
And yes.
That's the danger. Yeah, and then that's the danger with not even knowing you have a problem. You potentially could have a problem. It's you don't know what you don't know.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right now, engineers across the planet in many domains are doing things that are making them successful. That are almost certainly violations of a rule that will only be trotted out after an adverse event.
Something bad,
right?
Yeah.
There are people who are not testing backups of their servers right now.
Yep.
I could ask you when was the last time Metafor tested a backup of one of their servers. But if you have a data loss event, then I get to point at you and I get to say you never tested your backups.
Right.
So therefore, you're faulty.
Right.
And so again, multiple conflicting goals. We can't be surprised by any of this.
Yeah. Okay. So let's look forward a little bit. I'm going to wrap this up. So 4 years ago, you did this talk, spawned a whole movement. What do you hope we could achieve, or what do you want to see change in the next 4 years? What do we hope we can go as an industry in operations or DevOps?
Yeah.
That 4 years later, you're going to say, "Wow, we really did some great things." Any specific areas we should be focusing on looking at?
Yeah. I'm biased. I have a very
That's right.
strong.
This is your interview, so you get to say whatever you want.
I'm strongly interested in in system safety, and how we as humans navigate this type of work. And so I do think that we're asking the right questions. I think we need to keep asking more questions. I think we need to stop accepting that answers will only come in the form of 140 characters. I think that there are a number of really, really sharp thinkers who in the field who are beginning to ask a lot of the questions that occur to me as well. And I would say that at a very high level, I would say that we need to get better at asking questions and asking better questions. We sometimes believe that the goal is to have answers. And to sort of piggyback on Strata, which just finished here in London. Anybody who's ever run a big data stack understands that, okay, well, once you have the horsepower to get answers, turns out that having the right questions is the way harder problem once you have that infrastructure solved. And I think that there's like a metaphor there, no pun intended, for our industry.
Working on the really hard stuff, asking the right questions.
Even questions that we've never dared ask before.
About. Yeah, good. I lied. One last question. This is a fun one. Who would win in a fight between pirates and ninjas?
Oh, ninjas.
Ninjas for sure. Why?
Because they're invisible, you can't hear them, and pirates are on boats and they stick out really poorly.
Good. We all want to be ninjas. Yeah. All right. Thank you, John. Thanks so much, and hopefully we'll not wait for 4 years to see you again. Thank you.
All right. Thanks.
Okay.